Cool.
Welcome to episode 5 of Nuts About Thrust. My name's John, and we're here with Zach as usual. And we have a special guest. John is joining us today, and we wanted to talk about different career options for aircraft mechanics or AMPs or aircraft maintenance technicians, whatever we're calling them, whatever flavor they're calling them today. And so John was gracious enough to join us, and we appreciate it. And I'll let you introduce yourself. So everyone, this is John.
Hey, I'm John Skocek, Director of Maintenance for a private operator. We operate a Global 6000.
So I guess my questions would be, how did you get into that? What is a Global 6000 for those of us that, people that don't know what's kind of the primary purpose of the aircraft itself?
Okay. Global 6000, it's built by Bombardier. It's an ultra long range corporate jet. So it basically flies real far. It can go from, I guess, distance wise, that makes sense. Probably you've got from Addison, Texas to Tokyo, Japan nonstop, or from Addison to Greece, I guess, nonstop. So it's typically used a lot of corporations have them. I mean, they use them to go overseas, meet with international clients. The operations that I've been with recently, they're just owned by private owners who can afford to have a jet like that,
right?
Just be able to go where they want to go when they want to go.
Yeah. So 6,000, is that like the number of nautical miles that it can travel? Because I know they have like 7,000s and.
Yeah, roughly, I guess. Yeah, it's about right.
Okay.
So, is it sort of a reference?
I was just wondering if that was the naming convention or. Yeah. So how many passengers or what's your seating configuration?
It depends on the configuration. We're about 13 in the cabin, and then we have another crew rest area. So we got that. That's makes 14, and then a jump seat.
Okay.
Plus 2 crew. So.
Okay. And then just so, I mean, I know a little less, so I'm going to ask these kind of questions for people who may not know, people who might be listening on the streaming platforms or watching on YouTube. Just so that I understand better, what's your title one more time, and then how and what does that kind of entail?
Director of maintenance. I guess I just direct maintenance on the airplane. I also do the maintenance. There's different flavors. I guess it just depends on how you want to actually operate the maintenance department within an operation. I personally love doing things hands-on. I mean, it's always been my hobby and just things I just love fixing stuff. So I do a lot more hands-on. I also schedule the maintenance into different facilities depending on what, the extent of the actual work. So I have like a particular, whether it's a monthly inspection or an hourly inspection cap that I know I can perform myself or with maybe one other guy. And so we try to keep the airplane as much as we can out of the service centers because we can save costs that way and reduce the amount of maintenance errors that typically happen.
And it's typically the owner whoever's owner of the plane is who's going to bring someone like you on, right? Someone who might be working in your position anyways.
Yes. Usually the owner will I think he gets advised by, like, say, the chief pilot that, they probably need a mechanic on staff. Okay. It's probably, ideal. Makes more sense to have somebody on staff than to, just randomly just take your airplane to the service center every single time. I mean, it'll, one, it's going to, the amount of downtime and just trying to plan into a service center, because typically, it takes months before you can even get in. It just doesn't make any sense.
Have someone handle that for you. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
And then also having just somebody that's in the maintenance world that can handle like the just knows what's going on with the parts, just the industry, and just how to manage all of that and keep costs down as best you can and keep the airplane operational, I think is, ideal. So without the airplane flying, I mean, there's no point in having it. So,
yeah. You keep it going. That makes sense. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I was noticing you're getting text messages from your crew. I guess they're out flying, and we're having some issues with something on the airplane, right?
Yeah. There was a time where there wasn't as much connectivity with the airplane. And for a maintenance guy, it's like airplane left, great. When it comes back, I'll get a list of squawks. Now it's like as soon as it takes off, it's like you can get texts all through the entire phase of flight on all the problems that happen. Yeah, which is good and bad. I mean, usually, before it was, when they came back and they're like, oh yeah, that went away and they forgot about it. You never knew, and that can be good. Or sometimes it's like, oh, we've got these certain issues that popped up, and so now you're trying to figure them out as you go, and then when it gets back, it's like. It has its benefits, and I mean, when there's a serious issue, it's great. Like, for instance, one story we had, my last global, we we were going across the Atlantic over to Greece, and we got feet wet, so we're over the ocean now, and the center transfer pumps on the fuel system failed. And there's an advisory wire out on it, and all. And they give you a procedure where you descend to a certain altitude, try to reprime the pump, and go back up. Well, at the time, the crew didn't know that this was an actual serviceable, so they're crossing the pond, and they're like, "What do we do now? We're not going to have enough fuel to get across." So they were able to contact me, and we went through certain things. They're already planning on their diversion and all that. And, I was able to find that advisory wire. So, okay, it's a normal situation. We might be able to do something about it. And anyway, we were able to work through it, and they made it across. Otherwise, without any contact, the crew may have turned around and landed somewhere in Europe or landed somewhere, that
it wasn't part of the plan.
Yeah, we wouldn't even needed to. So. So they're definitely huge. Having connectivity is definitely a nice thing to have. So.
Yeah, for sure.
It's crazy. I didn't know that was a thing where you just get live update. You can get live updates still. I mean,
they're sending you, they're texting you, right?
Yeah, they're texting me on the airplane. So
sending you pictures of stuff, and you can always ask them to make sure that the switch is in the ON position.
There's that. Yeah.
Did you turn it off, and did you turn it on again?
Yeah. And sometimes,
or did you accidentally turn it off, or did you never turn it on?
Exactly. Or that, or even like if it's a problem, you can tell them, well, let's we can go ahead and cycle a certain breaker or something like that. Maybe get the system back online. So there's definitely benefits of connectivity. It's just, and texting is great because the pictures you can get too.
Right.
Before when it got to a point where you could make phone calls, that was good, but pictures and all that just
so much easier. Even now, like I'm a little bit more technical than some of my friends, and they'll send me a picture or something. I'm like, oh, I can text right back what to do, but instead of having to do a call or something, so it's kind of nice to help out with things. Now, obviously, I couldn't do that on a plane, but that makes me so back to what John was asking earlier, a little bit more about maybe how you even got to where you're at with moving into this portion of your career. I mean, did you maybe we can start off at the beginning?
So when a flight department or corporate aviation or a family is looking for a director of maintenance, or like what sort of, if somebody is aspiring to do that, what sort of background are they looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think with positions like that, I think a lot of times it's word of mouth. So like, especially with this position here, I mean, there was crews from my last operation that kind of knew me. So when this airplane came to this location, they started to reach out, and they were able to talk to, because the communities typically on any kind of airframe are pretty small. So kind of word gets around. But I think originally when I started, at least my path is, I went to work for Bombardier. So I worked for Bombardier for about 10 years. And from there I was able to just to be exposed to a lot of different customers and all that. So,
so was that was kind of your first job out of A&P school?
It was, yes, yeah. A&P. In fact, I started temporary, part-time. It was a temporary, part-time, and then went to full-time, which
the landscape for aircraft mechanics was much different when John and I started versus the way it is today. Everybody's having recruiting and hiring events and all sorts of parties, and they're coming to A&P schools like trying to actively hire people. Did we talk about Envoy? So Envoy's coming out to the school next week.
Yeah, you did mention that.
They give like written offers 2 months before graduation.
Wow.
With a promise of employment to the students if they they go through an interview process and this and that, but they're everybody is just really hurting for mechanics, which is driving wages up, which I think is a good thing. It's probably was a little low for a long time, but
right. It sounds like they're being a little more competitive on the hiring side to say, hey, we do want you here.
I know that your son just got his license, right?
He did. Yes.
So you say sometimes you need some help. Are you able to use him some, or are you?
Oh, absolutely.
Or is he now too expensive because he's licensed?
No. Well, actually, I mean, his road, since he was working up, gaining his hours through OJT, he was very inexpensive, so it was very attractive to use him as as help. But no, now, I mean, as a full-fledged A&P, I mean, I'd be wrong to not pay him if I needed him. So,
right.
I mean, I'd hire anybody, and have to pay him. So
Yeah.
I mean, at this point,
And he has a lot of experience on global jets, I'm guessing.
he does. Yeah, he started off with the 604, and then as I moved operations, he came with me. So 604, Global Express, and Global 6000.
Yeah, great free labor for a long time, I'm sure.
I know, it was awesome. It was awesome. Reliable, free, all sorts of things.
Knew where he was at in the morning.
Exactly.
You don't have to know where he's at. You're right.
Get up.
It's like, yeah, he's
Let's go to work.
Yeah.
Would you say then, in that, because it sounds like people kind of find a type of aircraft they like to work with, or even a role they might like, and they become a little bit more of a specialist in a way. Do you think that tends to be what helps people
That is
move?
totally true. Yeah, and that's always been my story. I always just tell is when I started with Bombardier, they had a lot of Lear jets at the time because it was in Florida, and we just Bombardier just picked up AMR Combs, so they were actually working on a lot of different airframes. And then they got rid of all the airframes except for Bombardier stuff. So there was the Lear jets, which everybody who started out seemed to go to the Learjet side. And then as the Challengers were kind of rolling in, they were kind of new. We could barely fit one in our original facility. We actually had to jack the nose way high just to try to clear the tail to get it in. But anyway, everybody loved those because they were just a little more complex, and it was just a bigger airplane. Just So I always said, like, I knew I wanted to work on those, but trying to get there was hard. So I'd learn everything I could about the Challenger, and I was like, ask me a question, I know it. And then when it came to the Learjet, like, what's a Learjet? So I guess that worked for me, but yeah, so eventually I moved into the Challenger line, and then as the Globals came out, I kind of worked into that.
Yeah, so people definitely specialize in types of aircraft. I mean, you're never going to be an expert on everything, right? It's impossible.
It's true. And I think one of the things too that's always helped me out when I was going into a service center, because what was nice about the service centers is you have all different type of shops. So I was able to expose myself to all the airframe stuff, a little bit of power plant, and then I got into avionics. So I was able to do pretty much all the shop, go and get my experience in a lot of different areas. So I mean, it's helped me out here, currently, because I could work on anything that the airplane has.
Yeah, and especially in your role, it sounds like you said you like to be hands-on, and you can touch on whatever you need to just a little bit, at least. So
yeah, I mean, those are big, complex aircraft with complex systems, and he was talking about a problem that he was having with something the other day, and I pretended to know what you were talking about, but like, oh yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of pretending going on. No, they are complicated. I mean, it used to be. In fact, I was talking to another operator this morning, and it's like, it used to be where you could go and you flip a switch and it turns on a light. All right, now you got a touch screen that's got this bus system, complex bus system that goes through all these other boxes and then finally turns on the light. So he's been last couple of days trying to figure out how to turn on his lights on his airplane, where before it was you just push a switch and there you go, it's on.
Well, you have circuit breakers under glass too? Like, are all your circuit breakers on the Global Jets, are they like push button on a screen, or are they actual breakers?
They're called, well, we have a few of the old school push-pull breakers, but most of our stuff is all virtual. So there's a computer screen that controls another computer, and it opens and closes virtual breakers. So
I got into the van life thing for a second, and then I did some research as I worked on one for myself. But I saw, the people who were going all out on their van had a digital interface for their breaker system, so they could, because in a small place like that's kind of dangerous. So you have to be, I don't know, they had so much control from a screen. I didn't even know you could do that though, and I don't know if that's anything similar. Obviously, it's a plane, so it's got a lot more going on.
Yeah,
but
I don't know. I'm kind of old school. I miss the days of the push pull, because troubleshooting, when something was broke, it was broke. Like now something could be broke, and it could not even be the part that you're thinking is broke. It's some kind of
some kind of control.
You have to isolate the issue in so many different places.
It is, and especially with the way like the systems are designed, they're so redundant. There's like it could be a processor. You have like dual processors, and like only one's working at one time. So you could be. I mean, there could be a combination of what channels on what and what day, and I mean it can get a little crazy, but
and then just like a software glitch, right?
Right. Yep. Even just
and you think about it, your phone starts to lock up. What do? You turn it off, or you turn it back on, and it works. And that is also a thing. Shutting those computers down and letting them reboot sometimes just fixes whatever hang up in the software that you had.
It does. And, you know, it depends too. Like as airplanes come out, you know, they're like, especially the Global, when that thing came out, oh man, there was problems on every system. It seemed like, you know,
That's
and
what I
it
was
just,
wondering,
there was just nonstop service bulletins and software upgrades and all that. And now they've gotten to, you know, it gets to a point where they're stable, you
yeah.
know, I mean, there's not as many issues as there was, but.
And does how does the training programs, how do they keep up with some of the technological advancements with things like that? Like, I mean, a lot of that stuff you're going to learn in the field, it sounds like, regardless. I'm just wondering, is there any tips you would have for anyone who is having to adjust to a lot of the new technology that's coming out?
They have training courses.
They do. Yeah, manufacturer provides training course for each airplane, which provides, and then also like a lot of the manufacturers of specific components, like say like the electrical system, you know, avionics systems. You can go to those specific manufacturers and take training there, which is, you know, invaluable.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's really until you get your hands in there. I mean, you can do so much training on, you know, in a classroom, but until you get your hands on there and start seeing how the thing actually functions, and
Right.
I mean, there's things you just can't teach, and then you can't teach everything. I mean, everything, you know,
There's so much.
Yeah, because I mean, they teach how the system's designed. So if it breaks here, you'll see the fault here, you know, kind of. But you know, the reality is like, yeah, it's not always clear cut like that.
Yeah.
You know? And in fact, sometimes it's so the clear cutness is so like so infrequent that you end up, you know, overthinking everything, and you're like, oh well, maybe that thing is actually broken, you know,
Right.
like
Yeah,
they say.
right.
So
It's like the skill set either way is problem solving.
yeah,
Like no matter what, you just have to be ready to go down the rabbit hole every time.
absolutely. I mean, but that's the life of a mechanic, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's just what we do is fix stuff. So
That's great.
we just have to figure it out. That's our
So do you ever go on any trips with the airplane?
very infrequent. I always, you know, it's funny because, you know, especially with these airplanes, I mean, typically if there's something broke, you should be able to talk through most of the stuff that typically breaks. But when it comes to like something, if say you lose a generator or something, you know, it's nearly impossible to carry every tool that you might need. So sometimes it just makes more sense. Like, okay, well, if the airplane breaks abroad, then I can try to coordinate with somebody nearby to do something, or I'll dispatch myself and bring the tooling. So
Right.
it's never a clear cut answer. But as far as going, I mean, you know, some operators they'll bring a mechanic all the time, which there's nothing wrong with that.
That's
You
nice.
know, but you know, for as far as the majority of the time I've ever operated, I've always stayed home and been able to handle most things from home, which I mean I prefer myself, but
Yeah.
I mean if I have to go, I'll go. Like I just recently went to Paris because it was the first time we went over to overseas with this airplane. We just got this airplane, and you know it just made sense for me to go just in case. You know.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah, it was terrible.
It sounds terrible.
Was your wife able to join you?
She was able to go and
Oh,
that's awesome.
help out. So.
I'm sure she hated that.
Yeah, she hated that. It was a great experience for both of us. I guess.
Yeah.
A lot
Do you have
more
any
comfortable.
interesting stories of an airplane that might have broken down overseas or something that you had a hard time coordinating? Or
Oh man, yeah. It was last year. I had one breakdown in Italy, and that was a mess. We had it had just fueled up. It was fully loaded with fuel, packed to the rim. I think we take about on that airplane. It's like a 43,000 pounds. So we were taxiing out, and the crew called me and said, "Hey, we had this low hydraulic quantity light come on," and I said, "Well, you know, we need to." You know, I asked them what the quantity said on the screen, and they told me, I think it was like 15% or something crazy. It should be like around 40, 50%. Anyway, I'm like, yeah, we need to go back to the ramp and, you know, go check the gauge in the back. So our MEL allows us to dispatch as long as, you know, if we have a bad indication in a cockpit, but we have a good indication on the actual reservoir, we could dispatch. Well, I was thinking for sure we just had a bad sensor to the cockpit. And they went back to the ramp, went back to the back of the airplane and looked at the gauge, and it was showing the same percentage. And I was like, what? I was like, that's a lot of fluid to lose. And I'm like, can you guys like look at look around the airplane. There's got to be fluid flowing out of the airplane, you know? And sure enough, there wasn't. And I'm like, man, so I had to try to, I actually contacted a manufacturer who put me in contact with a company that was in a country nearby, I guess. So they had to dispatch something, so somebody to take a look. And so at that time, you have to figure out, you have to make a decision. Hey, I don't think we're going to be able to go. It's not going to be a quick fix. So the owner has to decide whether or not he wants to fly home on a charter or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, they did, and it wasn't until the next day that the crew went out to the airplane. They had a puddle of hydraulic fluid underneath one of the wings.
Oh, they could see it then.
Yeah, so one of the flight spoilers broke, was leaking profusely, and right before we left. So thankfully the crew called, which is great, and then thankfully we were able to go through the steps and not dispatch,
right,
and guess that everything was okay. But no, it was a pain because the procedure calls out for the airplane to be jacked, to change that, because you have to load up the wings, and we couldn't jack the airplane for one because, well, we had no jacks, and so we couldn't defuel the airplanes. The field that we were at didn't have defuel capabilities, and so we ended up having to. I was able to get the manufacturer to give me like a one-time, go ahead and install the actuator without jacking the airplane, which helped. But overall, I mean, it was a pain because we had to, we had all sorts of issues through this entire process. But I had to order the parts from Frankfurt and have them courier down along with a bunch of equipment because we couldn't get anybody to let us borrow like a servicing Bowser out there for the hydraulic system, and so it's one thing after another. And even the courier and the company that we were using, I mean, they kept delaying flights because they would come in, do something, and then leave to go to another job and then come back when parts showed up. But parts weren't showing up. Like you try to order something like FedEx overnight in Europe, it'll come 5 days later. So,
we're spoiled.
You just, it was a very difficult situation. So a lot of things happen. So, but again, like in this situation, even if I was there, I mean, me being home was great because I was on the same time frame as Bombardier Engineering, so I was able to communicate with them and get some of the relief that we needed to help us get out of there earlier. And it was funny because I think it took us a week to finally fix it and then dispatch, but it could have been another. It would have been 2 weeks to get the like jacks if I couldn't get if Bombardier said no, you have to follow the procedure whole. So there's a lot of moving parts. It's just and that's the thing I think comes with experience too. Like when you do see a fault, especially in this situation, they say always follow procedure, but sometimes you looking at the procedure, especially with the jacking part, it's like is that something that we can forego, and knowing the steps to make that happen, if even possible, I think is so.
Well, that's cool. If you could talk about, what an MEL is and kind of how it applies to your airplane.
Well, airplanes serve with a minimum equipment list, so it's a minimum amount of equipment the airplane needs to dispatch. And so what that does for us is that if we have a fault, we can go ahead and we go through this MEL and it'll list each individual fault, and we can determine whether or not it'll show like numbers of systems. So if you had, let's say for instance, screens up in the cockpit, you lose one, well, it'll say, okay, if you had like a Global Express, an older one, you have 6 screens, it'll say one, you can lose one and you could still dispatch. So and then it'll give you some operational procedures, like maybe like you can't fly, and like for if it's a part of the anti-ice system, it'll say you can't fly in icing conditions or something like that. And then it'll give you maintenance procedures. So if like it's a valve on the engine, it'll actually give you the procedure to like pin it out so you can disable it, and then it allows you to fly. If it's not in the minimum of the MEL, then that means that you can't go anywhere, so you have to fix it. So it's a way for us to be able to dispatch, and not like every single time that the airplane breaks, you're like stuck everywhere. And with these complex airplanes, it's
there's a lot of systems.
It is a lot of moving parts. So there's typically there you can have a thing or two broken
that is not overtly essential. Like
well, you like an example, you could probably lose one of your generators. You just fly with the APU on, right?
You could. There's
Is that
that.
on
I
your
mean, there's
MEL? I
like
know
a,
the
yeah,
airlines have lots of stuff like that.
yeah, thrust reversers. Like if you lose your thrust reverser, you can lock out the systems. That system. I mean, there's it. The manual's pretty thick, and then
Yeah.
and so like the FAA, they have like a master minimum equipment list for each aircraft, and then you typically get a MEL or a minimum equipment list approved for your particular airplane. So you'll
Mhm.
get a letter of authorization allowing you to use that particular
Yeah, you have to
MEL.
have that approved, and it's approved by the owner of the airplane, non-transferable, right?
It's not transferable. It's approved by the FAA. They go through a review process, and then
Mhm.
they give you a letter saying, yeah, you're authorized to use that
MEL for
MEL.
MEL.
okay,
So,
gotcha. And you're
And
saying
if
when you say non-transferable,
so,
like each owner?
if I sell the airplane,
Mhm.
the new owner is going to have to apply for their own MEL. They're
Yeah,
not going to be able to operate under that previously approved MEL.
right.
nice. And does it get like reassessed or something like that for that situation?
I mean, it's
Just
just every
curious.
situation. Is
Yeah,
different.
I
Yeah,
would imagine.
and actually it does. I mean, and it's part of this. Actually, out of all the things that you have to get approved, this seems to be the hardest thing to. And to me, it doesn't make any sense because I mean, it is. I mean, it's like, well, it's the same airplane that went from this owner to the next owner.
Yeah.
You think there would be a streamlined way to get. There's
Well,
nothing changed.
We're
Yeah.
talking about the government here.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
But
It's,
but yeah, the FAA can be. I mean, they have their processes, and,
yeah,
and
yeah.
so some of them just take a little more time.
Yep, that's all it takes sometimes.
So do you guys operate Part 91, or are you
Yes.
on a 135?
Yes, we're Part 91.
Okay.
Thinking about 135, but
So for those of you
Yeah.
listening, like Part 91 is
pretty call it the free for all, not the free for all, but no, it's just not for hire.
Mhm.
So there's a few less regulations that we have to follow
Mhm. As a maintenance team?
as maintenance and
And-
operations too.
Okay. Okay.
But if you go Part 135, then it allows you to like charter your airplane out for hire. But then the regulations are a little more strict as
Mhm.
far as how you do your maintenance, how you do your operations. Pilots have to have certain rest periods, stuff like that. So it's
Because it can be, like you said, being chartered out.
Yeah,
like,
'cause
they're going to regulate that more because it's involving more people. It seems
yeah,
like.
because it's a business then. And
yeah,
being-
it's open to the public now. So
right. So
you're,
Part 91 you would think of as just private use,
Mhm.
right? Like so the owner of that airplane can use it for their own use. They cannot charge anyone for flights. They it's all just their own. And
Mhm.
as a Part 135, if they're not using the airplane, they could put it onto a charter for someone else to
Okay.
use. Yeah, I was reading about
Gotcha.
one of the corporate flight departments, and I can't remember. I think it was Coca-Cola. They switched from hiring aircraft mechanics to everybody has like a director of maintenance title, and that's part of their corporate structure. But also they have one technician is a program manager or something is assigned to that aircraft, and he does kind of like similar to what you do.
That's what I was
So
wondering.
he schedules all the maintenance for that aircraft, does whatever maintenance he feels like he can, has a budget that he's controlling, to try to stay within, right? Sometimes that gets blown out of the water depending on what breaks, I would imagine. But
Yeah, does that mean so? I wonder, you said something kind of like a manager role. Are there other roles that are, let's say, where a lot of your skills would be transferable that maybe someone could be aware of, whether it be Part 135 or something? Does it change much? Your role or the title? I'm not sure if.
Well, titles, I mean, they're just kind of given out. I mean,
Yeah.
DOM is just a good industry, thing. I mean,
Mhm.
when you're dealing with like, service centers, stuff like that,
Mhm.
DOM, that kind of says, yeah, you're kind of, running that deal.
At the end of the day, yeah.
A lot of, but as far as like technician or maintenance manager and all that, it's pretty much all the same. Whoever's, controlling, keeping an eye on the maintenance for that airplane, keeping an airway to make sure all the ADs, all that, scheduling maintenance, doing maintenance, it's all the same. And we're essentially old school mechanics. We're just, which now are technicians,
Yeah.
or
well, I think they said they
AMTs.
went from having like 20 mechanics on staff, and they did layoffs, and they just have one person per aircraft, and then they're sending to the service center for all the major inspections or hiring out or whatever they happen to be doing.
Yeah. There's I know of operation that they operate two globals, and they have I believe it's 7 guys. One of them's a DOM, and then they got then they have the rest are technicians for the most part.
Okay.
And yeah, it just depends on how you're structuring your system. I mean, there's no wrong answer to any of it, you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you have more guys, I mean, that's more eyes that you have on there. If you have one guy, you know, you got less eyes, you know. So it just all depends on. It really all just depends on the crew, the group of people,
Yeah.
you know, how you want to operate and.
So
It's flexible. Yeah.
did you always know that you wanted to work in corporate aviation,
That's what I wanted to
or
hear.
Oh no, I knew I wanted to work on corporate aviation when I first saw a Learjet with those winglets. I've never seen that before. I like, that's the coolest thing. I want to do that. And then, but I mean, I don't know if I knew like whether I was at
What you were getting into.
corporate or business or whatever. I just, when I first started out, I think, well, I was in the Navy at first, but you know, coming out, I think it was either commercial or general aviation, but I was like, oh, I want to do the jets thing, you know, and that looks cooler.
did you ever have any aspirations to like go to an airline or?
I don't think so. You know, I don't know because I had I guess during when I was in A&P school, I talked to some folks that came from the airlines, and they kind of like they're like, don't do it, and they explained just the you know the way they operate, you know, union and all that stuff. I was like, man, I want to do everything. I don't want to be stuck to one particular shop. And
And some people would say that would take longer, right, to take a route like you're talking about. But if you like what you're doing, then that's kind of a good reason to go that way.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, it's what you want to do. I mean, you know, I mean, airlines are great. I mean, you can make, you know, great money and you know, totally have an awesome career, you know, doing airlines. But yeah, for myself, I mean, it just depends on the person. I just like fixing stuff, and I like fixing a variety of things. So, you know, I just love figuring stuff out. So it was just, for me, it seemed to make sense.
Yeah, and you seem to have like a pretty good schedule. You're Monday through Friday for the most part. I guess you're probably up here if the airplane's leaving on the weekend or has something going on, I would imagine. But
yeah, I think that's probably for what I do. It's probably the biggest. The schedule thing is weird because you don't, you know, if you're looking for a 9 to 5 job, it's not really a 9 to 5 job. It's 24/7. So, you know, and you're at the whim of whatever the owner wants to do as far as fly when he wants to fly. And a lot of times it's holidays, they want to fly. So you can't be kind of, you know, you've got to be able to be flexible. And most operations, like even the one I'm currently in, you know, we've always had kind of a flexibility in the schedule, you know. Because I mean, sometimes, you know, some weeks are real heavy with maintenance and you're just doing tons of work. It's not like an 8-hour thing, you know?
Yeah.
And then, you know, if depending on, like, I've been part of a corporation that, you know, you get calls in the middle of the night, you know, because they're on the other side of the world, you know, at the end of the runway broke, and the CEO needs to get to his next meeting. And you're like, oh, great, you know, and you're trying to figure it out while you're trying to wake up. And, you know, so there's just no real
turn off switch.
Yeah, there is
no clocking out.
And like even vacations, like they become difficult at times, you know, because like, you know, it's like I know my airplane, I know how, you know, what's going on, and you know, how do you bring in somebody from the outside and just say, here, you know, and usually you have a small network of people that you rely on, you know, just in case, to kind of compensate. But even when I'm on vacations, I always say, like, you know, call me if you need, because it's just easier for me to handle it, especially if I'm on the road. And then, you know, I just
let y'all scramble for however long. So
yeah, and again, if something broke and it's like I'm on vacation, well, maybe I'll have to fly out there and fix it real quick and come back. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, so you just have to just know that that's a thing.
It's part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, but then again, you know, a lot of times, I mean, if the airplane is doing good, you know, you might have a light week or, you know, a light month. And it also depends on where the airplane's at too, and its inspection phase. You know, you've got a couple of years where you might have, you know, very few major inspections, and then, you know, you got some years that are super heavy. You know, and then if the airplane goes retrofitting somewhere, and then, you know, you're pretty busy usually at the end trying to repair, usually maintenance errors and different things like that. So,
do you have any advice for anyone who thinks that they're maybe interested in anything in the aviation around mechanics or engineering? I was wondering if there's do you think there's ways to go about learning? Is there, you know, do you compare different kinds of schools, that kind of thing? I know that might be a hard, kind of broad question, but I'm thinking about everyone coming into your class right now, and
yeah, I mean, his answer is, you know, Go to thrustinstitute.com and fill out the contact.
My advice is, like, if you think you're interested in it, find out, start working on stuff that you have, like automotive and stuff. Just
yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, I took everything apart.
Yeah,
everything.
That's
Like we would go to the neighbor's garage sales and buy all their old stereo equipment, and I would take all that apart and try to make one of them work. And
I know
I used to try to fix
that's
everything.
how I am. Yeah, my wife always laughs at me because every time I buy something, I'm taking it apart. She's like, "Why do you buy it if you're going to take it apart?" I'm like, "Oh, I just want to see how it works."
Yeah, I mean, still to this day we do that, right? But when I was a kid, I would take things apart, and then sometimes I could get it back together. Most of the time, it was just a part.
Wow.
Anyways, John, thank you so much for joining us.
No
Thanks everybody for listening.
Yeah.
So like and subscribe. Again, comment any future episodes, things that you want to talk about, and John kind of gave us a good insight onto what corporate/business aviation is about, as opposed to an airline career or work in general aviation, all the different kind of aspects. And we really appreciate your time.
Absolutely, and thank you all for joining us on the
5th episode of Nuts About Thrust.
Thanks for that interception. I appreciate it.